Thank you so much for checking out LearnLinuxTV, your source for Linux-related fun and learning. I just love making this content for you guys, but making such content isn't cheap. If you enjoy my content, please consider supporting me by becoming a patron. As a patron, you'll enjoy ad-free versions of every video that I upload, and also, at specific tiers, you'll also enjoy early access to select videos before the rest of the world. But even if you're not able to support me by becoming a patron, no problem. There's other ways to help. You can simply click the like button on the videos that you enjoy. That would help out. In addition to that, word of mouth helps as well. So if you're enjoying my content, please help spread the learning by telling your friends and coworkers about the channel. If you're looking for something to read, well, you're in luck. I write books. And you can check out my latest books at LearnLinux.tv/books. Are you looking for help for your Linux server related projects? Or are you a business that has a Linux related project that you're working on and you need another set of hands? Well, you're in luck. Go to LearnLinux.tv/request-assistance. There you can check out my schedule and consider hiring me to help you out. With all of that out of the way, let's go ahead and get started with today's video. Hello and welcome back to my Proxmox course. This is actually class number 15, and I've been looking forward to this one because we're actually going to set up our very own cluster of more than one Proxmox server. Now, I do understand that some of you guys out there, you might not have the spare hardware to follow along. Maybe you only have one server, and that's okay. You can still watch this video, and I'll show you how to create a cluster, so that way, if you do actually bring in a new server at some point in the future, you'll be able to cluster it. If nothing else, clustering is awesome, and that's what we're going to be taking a look at, so let's go ahead and dive right in. Alright guys, so let's get started with the process of setting up a cluster. Now, to be clear, I want to mention that in this video we are talking about clustering only, not high availability. Yes, high availability is part of clustering, but we're going to tackle that specifically in the next video. In this video, I'm going to be adding these three servers that you see on the screen right now. I have each one in a different tab in my browser. So off camera, I set up two other servers. So I'll be adding those other two servers to the cluster, and then I'll show you how to actually migrate a virtual machine from one host to another. In the next video, it's more of the same, but just a little bit more advanced. Now, I do understand that many of you guys out there, you probably don't have access to three different servers. Especially for those of you that are using Proxmox in a Homelab, maybe you only have one server. So it's okay if you can't follow along and set up a cluster on your own, but by watching this video, if nothing else, you'll at least see what the process looks like. So like I mentioned off camera, I went ahead and installed Proxmox on this node right here and this node right here. So we have these servers, let's go ahead and cluster them. So I like to start on the first server here. Now what we could do is jump straight into creating a cluster right now, but there's something that I like to do first before I do that, just to make sure the process is smoother. And what that is that I want to make sure that the same networks that I set up on the first server are available on the second. So if you recall, here's my first server. So here in the network section, we have this interface right here. This is the original interface, the one that we set up when we set up Proxmox originally. So it came with it, so to speak. And then, in a later video, we created this bridge right here, VMBR1. The idea being that virtual machines will use this network, and then the management layer will use this network. Now obviously, whether or not these two networks are truly separated depends on your firewall, which I'm not going to get into, but at least that's the purpose for why I created this other network. But the issue though, is if I was to go to PVE2, for example, I don't actually have another network set up here. I only have VMBR0. And that's the same here. And server number 3 is very different than the other two. The first two servers are my actual Proxmox production servers that I just wanted to wipe and redo anyway, which, really helped out with the creation of this series. But anyway, I actually have just one network here as well. Now, you can cluster these hosts right now without doing anything at all. It's just a best practice that I like to do to set up the same network on each. So what I'm going to do is go here, and because I'm lazy, whoops, wrong one. It's this one right here. Because I'm lazy, I am going to copy this subnet. I'm not actually going to make any changes, but I'll go over here to the second server. I'll create another bridge. And I'm going to type in the name of the other interface here. So first I want to paste in the subnet CIDR. And the ports that I'm going to bridge right here, I'm going to add ENP5S0F1. I'm not going to fill in any of the other fields here. That's actually enough. I'll click Create. So now we have that other bridge. And it's going to require a reboot. But I want to do the same thing over here on this other node. This node in particular doesn't actually have 10 gig Ethernet. And I want to mention that because we are going to be doing live migrations. So obviously any migrations to server number 3 are going to be slower than migrations to and from server 1 and server 2. But that's just an aside. What I want to do for sure is add that other network. So ETH0 is already used. So I'm going to use ETH1. Again, I'll create a bridge. I'll paste in the CIDR. And I'll type ETH1 right here for that interface. All right, so now that I've added this network to the other host, I can go ahead and reboot them. And as a quick aside, you might be wondering, why did I go through all that trouble? Well, the reason why is because over here on this server, even though I do plan on deleting these virtual machines and recreating them anyway, they're actually using the VM network that I set up right here. So if I cluster these and then I try to move a VM from this server over to another server that doesn't have that network set up, that's not going to work. So just to make it easier on myself, I'm essentially setting up that other network ahead of time on the other two servers before I actually cluster them. And you know what? I'm not going to reboot them. What I'm going to do instead is just apply the configuration. That should be good enough. So I'm going to do that on both. And I did get an error message right there. This test server is a new server to me. Just to be on the safe side, I'm going to reboot it. And then I'll go ahead and reboot this one as well. Just want to be on the safe side. I don't think that was necessary, but you know what? I think that's going to work out just fine. So I'll be right back. I'll give these servers a few minutes to start back up. And then once they do, I'll go ahead and show you guys how to set up a cluster. All right, so enough time has passed. The servers have rebooted. They're back in action. Let's get right into it. So what I'm going to do is go over here to PVE1, and I'm going to click on Data Center. Now, first of all, notice that each of these tabs right here, they have their own server as the only server listed. So for PVE3, we have a data center view, we have PVE3, and of course we have PVE2 right here. So even though I have a data center option on each, these are 3 separate data centers. These servers are not linked in any way. The only thing that they have in common is that one server can ping another one, but aside from that, there's no relation. But anyway, on server number 1 in data center view, what we could do is click on cluster, and we don't have a cluster yet, so we can simply create one. So for the name, I'll just call it PVE and then hyphen cluster. And I'm going to leave this IP address right here alone. That's the correct IP address. I'll just click create, and it says okay. So now we have a cluster. The cluster exists here on this server, PVE1. This is still the only node in this cluster. So by creating a cluster, we're basically saying that we intend on adding other hosts to the cluster, but we have to actually add those hosts to make it a cluster. So what you'll do is you'll click Join Information right here, and you absolutely should not show this right here in the open, in the clear, because this is private information right here. So you don't want this fingerprint to leak out into the public. So I'll click Copy Information. That should be enough. So I'll go over here to the second server. Then I'll go here to Data Center View on this server right here. I'll click on Cluster. And this time I'm going to click on Join Cluster. And I'll paste the cluster info right here, the same info that I actually copied to the clipboard earlier. So I just pasted that in. It autofilled the IP address for me, which is pretty cool. And right here, what I need to do is type the root password for the first server, which I've done. So I will join the cluster. Now, sometimes you might not see output right here, but if you go to the first server and then you open up the task view here at the bottom, you should see a message here that the join cluster has a status of OK. So I don't know why this happens here, why we don't see anything. It is what it is, so we can safely ignore that. Now I'll refresh the page. And let's log back in. Now notice that I have both of the servers listed right here. If I go back to PVE1, I also have both servers listed here. Let's go ahead and go to PVE3 and let's add that server to the cluster. So I'm just going to do the exact same thing. I'll paste in the information right here. I'll type in the magic password. Let's join the cluster. And I don't know why this happens. As you can see, I'm seeing output on this server, but the second server, there was no output at all when I added that one to the cluster. It is what it is. Sometimes you see output and sometimes you don't. I'm actually glad that the other server didn't show any output so you could see what I'm talking about. But anyway, I'll close this and then I'll refresh the page. And now we have all three servers. And regardless of which IP address for the host we type in for the management console, we should see each of the servers on the list, and I do. So we have PVE1, 2, and 3. So we have a few containers running here. And we also have a few virtual machines as well. So what I want to do is actually show you guys a migrating a VM from one server to another. So I need to get the IP address for this server right here. I actually don't need the IP address, but it just makes it cooler. You'll see what I mean in a minute. So we have 10.10.10.205. So what I'm going to do is switch over to a terminal. And what I'm going to do is actually ping that server. And now I have a continuous ping going to that server. So what I'm going to do is live migrate this server right here over to PVE2. If I expand PVE2, you'll see that it doesn't actually have any VMs at all. One thing that's pretty cool though is that it has both of the NFS shares mounted that we set up in an earlier video. I didn't have to go to the other servers and manually set those up. Since I joined them to the cluster, it synchronized that over to the other servers. As far as what this is right here, TrueNAS backups, don't worry about that. I was just restoring some backups earlier to test it out. That's why I have this Home Assistant server right here. I was just restoring one of my own VMs just to test out the backup. Testing out backups is a great thing to do. It has nothing to do with this series, so we can safely ignore that. Anyway, let's go ahead and migrate this server. But wait a minute. This server right here is not using shared storage. I do have shared storage right here, but if I go to the Hardware tab, and then I go to the hard disk, you can see that the hard disk is stored in local LVM. So this server is not using shared storage at all. And you know what? I don't have any intention, at least right now, of setting that up. I'll probably do that in the next video. I mean, yeah, we have PVE shared right here, but I'm not actually using that quite yet. Now, what's really cool is that Proxmox supports migration even without shared storage. So what that means is that you don't actually have to implement shared storage. You can actually go direct from one server to another. It's going to copy the blocks from the local storage on server 1 to the local storage on server 2. Now, a migration is going to take a lot longer this way. If you do have shared storage, then it's super fast, but you might have some dropped packets here. It is what it is, but it's pretty cool that Proxmox still allows you to migrate a server even when you haven't set up shared storage just yet. Anyway, we can see if I go down here that it's still responding to pings. I'm curious to see how many pings are dropped during this process. Let's find out. So I'll right-click on this server, and I'll click Migrate. And here I get to choose which of the hosts I want to migrate the server to. I'm going to migrate it to PVE2. And the reason why I'm choosing that particular server is because it uses an SSD, so it has fast storage. And it also has 10 gig Ethernet as well. So it should be fairly fast, at least considering that I don't have shared storage. So I'll choose that one. For target storage, I'll just make sure that it's also going to the same storage, or at least the same named storage, local LVM. That same storage exists on the others. That's local to PVE2. So I'm going from PVE1 to PVE2. So this server here should drop down and be available here on the second host. Now, one problem that we have is that it has a Cloud Init disk attached, and it's not going to actually migrate while that's the case. So let me go ahead and cancel out of here. And what I'm going to do is just remove this right here. Let's get rid of that. And unfortunately, I do need to shut it down to finish the process of removing that piece of hardware. So I'll shut it down. And I'm going to do the same thing here, may as well. You know what? I don't actually need a CD-ROM drive at all. So I'll remove that one. Just to clean this up a little bit, I like to remove unneeded hardware. It's a good practice. So let's start these servers back up. And of course, the pings have stopped because, well, the machine is down, so that should resume shortly. And we see it starting up. And now the server is responding to pings. So let's try this again. I'll right-click on it. Let's click Migrate. Again, PVE2. I could probably keep it on current layout, but I like to be explicit, so I'll just go ahead and choose that storage right there. And it's telling me here that migration with local disk might take long. Well, that's true. I mean, I'm going from disk to disk over a network. That's going to be orders of magnitude slower than a true live migration or live migration with shared storage, which we'll see in the next video. I do understand that. I am going to accept my fate and click Migrate. Let's see what happens. So it looks like it's starting it. It's still pinging. That's good. So it's actually going pretty quickly. Look at this. I would expect it to go a little bit slower than that, but I think that's reasonable. And it's still responding to pings. Still going strong. And there we go. Now it's possible that it did actually lose a few pings. I don't know. It doesn't look like it did. But the process was successful. That's pretty cool. Now what I'm going to do is migrate this over to the other server as well. I'm doing the exact same thing. And actually, I can close this right here. You don't actually have to keep that open while the process is going on. We have this cool little icon next to the main icon, or an emblem, if you will, that looks like a paper airplane. And that basically means that it's migrating that over to another server. All right, so you saw me go through the process of migrating a virtual machine over to the other server. And of course, in this video, we set up our cluster, so we got a lot done today. I have one more video in this series coming up for you guys. In the next episode, we're going to take it a step further and set up high availability. So definitely make sure you subscribe, and I'll see you there. So there we are. We now have our very own Proxmox cluster. Or at least I do. You may or may not have extra hardware in order to set up your own cluster. But like I mentioned in the intro, it's okay. At this point in the series, you may or may not have the required hardware to follow along anymore. But either way, we're all learning. We're learning Proxmox, and it's still fun. In the next episode, which is actually the final class, unfortunately, we're going to take this to a whole new level and take a look at high availability. So be sure to subscribe to my channel if you haven't already done so that way as soon as that episode is up, you'll be notified of that. And it could already be up, actually, because it depends on when you're watching this. Maybe the entire series is already available and you're just going right through the episodes. Either way, I really appreciate you watching this video and all the other episodes in this series, and I'll see you in the next episode. Thanks again for watching.